In a sacred land, blood spilled like the sea that gave birth to it. A king consumed by gluttony and possessed by the demons forgot what his scriptures and ancestors spoke. Or maybe his ancestors summoned these demons in the first place. Nobody really knows, but the Council of Kings that this king was able to harness and control only ever said, he has the hand of the gods by his side, and his people would preach as they'd slaughter the men and consume the children. They would celebrate hunts as their people gathered at the square, watching in joy death of the people. This is a story of the worst king, a sham shaman, and the delusions of grandeur. Dear strange listeners, is it time for a story yet? The story that I'm going to be talking about is a story relayed to me by my mistress. It was one of those times where we were having tea and biscuits in the library. So much for the library name, I guess. And she just reminisced about the pasts that she has lived. And then she would crouch back on the chair and say, did I ever tell you about the story of a king who was consumed by gluttony? And hence comes the story. The story begins with a boy born in a family of shamans and intelligence. He knew the history of his people, like the back of his palm. The horrors, the blood, the murder, and their displacement from the very land his ancestors thrived in. A beautiful utopia, nestled by the coast of the sea, hugging the mountains, only to be suddenly taken away from them. The boy made a vow of secrecy among him and the stars he considered his. He said, I shall bring a land that my people won't have to live in fear. And something about that vow's determination worried the heavens and the nanny that nurtured him. Moving ahead with time as one does, the boy was no longer what the nanny raised. He was a king whom she wished she would have killed the day he was born. The king she wished she never nurtured. The king she wished her people would have just left to die when their family came knocking upon their doors asking for refuge. You see, the king was not only just a boy who had made a vow of protection, but also the boy who became the very people that his ancestors ran away from. Now, it must sound really absurd, wouldn't it? Why would a boy whose ancestors escaped death become the very death itself? But as I asked my mistress the question, why would the boy ever do that? Ah, she would just close her eyes and rub her palms on her forehead and say something very simple like, you know, as humans, we love destruction. But sometimes I wonder if she's actually wrong. And that's where, unfortunately, this story is headed. You see, kings before this very little king did the same thing, but in secrecy. The very first king of the refuge land was the one who started to slaughter kids, a serial killer, feared and revered, living in the forest among the skulls. He became a feared necromancer, bringing back the dead, but also using the dead for his own fortune and gain. The next king after him was Ruthless Warrior. He had survived and lived the horrors as a teen. So, just like our little boy of the story, he would boast, I shall fence a land for my people, and I shall ensure no one ever tries to consume it. And so began his ruthless journey of fencing an entire kingdom built on the blood of the very people that protected them. The third king, who was intelligent, you could say, sensible, came up with an excuse of the people who protected us evidently want to kill us. And somehow, the people that were saved, the people who were refused, blindly believed him. I asked my mistress at this point, Mistress, why would they kill the people that protected them? Why would those people blindly believe a king that's clearly gone mad with his intelligence? That's when she would get scary. She would open her eyes and sit upright. Still, you would wonder how silent can a human be if you see her in that state. She would clearly express her anger in her voice, but her demeanor never changed. And she would tell me, when you have an imagined fear, wouldn't any explanation just make you feel better? And she's correct. If somebody told me the spider in the attic was a monster, I would believe it and kill it, okay? So I agreed. Moving further, the boy was probably the 9th in the line. By now, the sea that ran parallel to their kingdom. I apologize. My mistress just ran from behind me, and I thought I saw a ghost, so I slipped. Never mind. We shall continue. There was a sea that ran parallel to the kingdom's land, and with the amount of blood that was shed before him, you would assume that it had turned red. And indeed it did, but not the water, the land. According to my mistress, when she came upon to the land, it felt as if she was watching hell come to life. The king and his people were enjoying the grandeurs of luxury, living in palaces, wearing regency items. She said some of the fashion was so royal that even she felt the urge to get it. But that's not why she was there. She was there because she had a history to document and people to watch as they died. Now you must wonder why my mistress didn't help them. I also don't know. My mistress is a weird person, and I just have to go with whatever she said. My mistress would describe things that I could only ever explain as brutal, odd. My mistress is not a normal human being, at least I get that. But even for her, as she spoke, she said, even for some monster like me, the vision that some humans have is beyond what hell would want. And I've never been to hell, so I don't know what she means, but I think it's a bad thing. I apologize. I get distracted. Moving further, let us get into some serious details. So, if, my dear strange listeners, you cannot tolerate the brutality of humanity and its crumble of bodies, please do not listen me further. My mistress would recount things that she thought was absurd and obscure, like the king of councils that I mentioned. According to her, the land has long established a kingdom of councils to hold each other accountable for crimes that may be committed. But in the case of this king and his kingdom, the king of councils would just only ever say, "He has the hand of God." And everything that he had done would be forgiven. You see, my mistress saw houses of the people that protected them, house of the nanny that raised the king, and she said, "Do you know, sweetheart, the olives that I grew, the very olives that complement the king's garden, are no longer mine, even though my ancestors and I spent years living beside them. We spent years worshipping them, years feeding off them. Those olives were all that my culture had and respected. Those olives were our heritage. And now we have nothing but corpses on our pathways." And that's where my mistress asked her, "You raised the king." And she'd scoff and say, "Our people wish we had never given them refuge in the first place. We welcomed them with open arms, and look what it got us." Sometimes, kindness is the worst virtue you could have. And by the look in her face as she sipped on the tea, it felt like it dawned on her that maybe kindness is the worst virtue a human could have. It was as if she contemplated for a moment. And that's when I looked at her and said, very oddly from my mouth was coming words that I did not believe. But I just said to reassure her, kindness is not the worst virtue you could have. Kindness being abused and your need to abuse that kindness is the worst virtue you could have. That says more about you than it says about the other people, and that has said more to me about the king and their people than about the nanny herself. She scoffed and told me to shut up and listen to the rest of the story. My mistress accounted seeing children with bones that stuck to their skin. It was as if skin and bones was what was left of them. She said that the old people were nothing but dead bodies. She saw newborns in corpses and wrapped in rag cloths. She said she heard screams and cries, and there was nothing she could do about it. Because even though my mistress is not human, she feeds. And she said, those were the days that were the worst. She said, there were people from other kingdom who wanted to aid, who wanted to talk, who wanted to spread the word, but only she ever saw them hung or chopped from guillotines, because their kings were the ones that were supporting the king. I don't want to bore you with other details, but she sighed and kept her teacup down, half drunk, half empty. And she said, do you know, that was probably one of the days where I wished that humanity never existed. The king won. The people were dead, all of them reduced to corpses fed to vultures, all of them reduced to bodies that were used by the king to savor himself. Did you know that the king cooked and ate the nanny that raised him? And the sentence almost sounded sickening. It almost sounded that the tea I had would just come out of my mouth. It almost sounded as if I was hearing a barbaric story and not a story about a king who rose from the blood of so many people on his hands. My mistress just laughed. My mistress laughed as if this was so funny to her. When I asked her, your laughter is uncomfortable, mistress. That's when she spoke. She said, as I laid there unwillingly against my will, they tried to rip apart the very history I was writing down. They didn't want other people to know. And that's when it dawned on me. They never believed they were right. They just believed that it belonged to them. Humans and their self-righteousness, am I right? And probably that's when the whole story dawned on me. This king had power, this king had resources, and this king had support of many kings, but not their people. This king abused his power to kill the very people that protected and fed him because he thought their land, their culture, their trees, their forests, their nature, everything belonged to him and his people. And I think that's the worst kind of entitlement you could ever have. Thinking that this limited time you have on earth and everything belongs to you. I looked at my mistress and I asked her, what happened to the king and the kingdom? And she laughed because she knew I was looking for some kind of happy ending, that the kingdom crumbled and fell, the king died a worse death, but she only said, the king survived with minimal things, you know? And then she slapped my wrist and I asked her, why would you do that? And she said, well, that's what the king got for all the blood that he shed. Remember how I told you that the sea turned red? Yeah, that detail haunts me because the mistress said that the children that survived were driven to their deaths by forcing them to drown in the sea. And that's how the sea turned blood red. And at this point, I just frustratingly banged my wrist against the table and told her, this is so frustrating. Why doesn't Mother Nature do anything? I mean, it's by the sea. Can't the sea just engulf the kingdom? Can't God come and strike them down like lightning or thunder? And that's when my mistress looked at me and said, sweetheart, I have spent so many years living amongst humans. I walked this earth before even humans walked on it. And let me tell you one thing. God only exists for power. God only exists because we want a fantasy of justice that is not in our palms. We want God because we know rich and powerful men will get away. But sweetheart, trust me, there is no God. There is just us, our silence, our ignorance, and the powers the rich hold to bow us down. And I guess that makes sense why she has a library that's fucking underneath the earth and it's hot in here. But today, this is the story that I have for you. A king's gluttony, some bloodshed. Okay, not some bloodshed, there was a lot of bloodshed. And an illusion that is God. Now, I am no one. I am just a doll that's talking to you. You believe in God, you don't believe in God, that is up to you. But the story truly makes you wonder, my dear strange listeners. Is it God that we want? Or is it the justice that we know some people will never get? That is all for today, my dear strange listeners. Let's come with another story for another time.